Hello, welcome to the Daily Faded. My name is Hetz. This is where we get faded daily and talk about politics and news of the day. How are you guys doing tonight? I hope you're doing well. Anyway, let's get started. A couple of, one standard thing that we do every night, talk about where we're at with the pandemic. 29.4 million cases globally. The global death toll is up to 933,228. In the United States, we have 6.6 million confirmed cases of coronavirus. There was around 32,000 new cases today. And US deaths is 195,735, and I think it was around 800 deaths today. So that's our coronavirus check-in. Boy, I really screwed up the stream last night. There was a lot that didn't really work that well. And so there's just one thing that I really regret not having been able to show you properly last night. So I'm going to show it to you today. And hold on one second. Challenging times. Okay, sorry about the wait there. I'm still getting used to this. This was flying around on Twitter yesterday, and this is actually Rebel HQ Emma Vigeland's video, where she started with this amazing video of some Trump folks. So let's check it out.
A passionate call for action Friday morning in St. George. Several police officers on standby as many locals called concerned that coronavirus spikes overblown.
The flu kills more than coronavirus.
Others calling the virus a hoax or stating that asymptomatic carriers simply do not exist and they cannot be forced to wear masks anywhere as citizens of the United States.
If we want to wear a mask, that's fine. We can take care of ourselves.
Some rally attendees say they shouldn't ever wear masks if they have any medical issues or mental health concerns, or if they feel they simply can't breathe.
When George Floyd was saying, "I can't breathe," and then he died, and now we're wearing a mask, and we say, "I can't breathe," but we're being forced to wear it anyways.
But many stated that they believe in all cases, masks jeopardize kids' health. Parents are demanding they have the right to decide what to do with their
Listen
children.
closely here.
I'll tell you another reason I hate masks. Most child molesters love them.
School administrators responding that they don't understand why crowds are protesting them based on a mandate given by the governor.
She compared mask wearing to George Floyd's murder.
There's Emma Vigeland serving it up. That's just the craziest shit that I've ever seen. I mean, no, it's 2020. The craziest shit I've ever seen is something I see every 5 minutes. So that's just another crazy thing in a crazy year. To compare having to wear a mask with George Floyd is absurd, absurdity at its height. I mean, that's just insanity. So, you know, and to appropriate the language of the pro-choice movement. Oh, it's crazy making. Anyway, we missed that last night, and I just wanted to show it tonight. So Biden's lead in the Real Clear Politics average is actually down today, down to plus 6.8, largely because of two recent polls that show him at only 5 points up ahead of Donald Trump. There's also a poll for 2 points up, but it's all the way at the bottom of the chart. It's about to drop off, so that might. I've seen some takes about how, with everything that's happened, the race is remarkably stable. And I was inclined to think that a couple of weeks ago, but here it's clearly thinning. The lead is clearly thinning, and Trump is somehow making ground, which is just bonkers, insane. The idea that Trump could be making ground given everything that has happened in the last couple of weeks with Trump. Moving on, NBC News broke a story today that I think is really important. General McKenzie, the commander of CENTCOM, told NBC News that he has seen no evidence of Russian bounties on U.S. troops in Afghanistan. This is the commander-in-chief for CENTCOM. This is the guy who oversees Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria. So if anyone would have seen the intelligence, it would be him. I did not believe this story when it first broke. It did not sound well sourced to me, and I think this revelation today just reveals that story was bunk. Moving right along, everything's just kind of stream of consciousness tonight. Sorry about that. Out of the LA Times today, the California test positivity rate is down to 3.5%. That is a great number. A month ago, it was twice that high. This is the lowest level of new cases since mid-June. And test turnaround in California is down to 1.3 days, which is a great and useful thing. So we are making some progress in California. I'm very happy about that. I'm very concerned about the political impetus to reopen getting in the way of the science and us starting to open things like restaurants and bars again before it's really smart to do so. But who knows? We'll see what happens. In other news today, the family of Breonna Taylor is receiving a $12 million settlement from the city of Louisville, Kentucky. Look, it's a good thing that the family is getting a settlement. That's a good thing. It will change their lives. It won't bring back Breonna Taylor. So, of course, I'm happy they're getting a settlement. Good for them. But they also committed to making reforms in the Louisville Police Department so that shooting like Breonna Taylor's would not happen again. That I will believe when I see it, because I'm not quite sure how they can predict exactly what they're going to get through their town political process, their city political process. So we'll see about that. But while I'm mentioning that, I also want to briefly mention the shooting of two LA Sheriff's Department deputies in Compton this past weekend. It's a terrible crime and a terrible tragedy. I don't harbor any sympathies for the Blue Lives Matter crowd, but the video of these two deputies being shot, man just walking up and opening fire on them, is absolutely horrific. And so I want nothing more than for them to survive and heal. And I want this killer to be brought to justice, whatever that means. But that said, a lot of people freaked out about protesters supposedly chanting, "I hope he dies," or something like that outside the sheriff's department. And I think that people who are freaking out about that, I think that they're not paying attention to what's going on in Los Angeles between the community and the LA Sheriff's Department. We've had the shooting of Andres Guardado and the shooting of Dijon Kizzee very recently, and protesters have been met with harsh tactics from Ala Villanueva's shock troopers and gangs. So we, the people of Los Angeles, know that our sheriff's department is full of literal gangs where they have to shoot somebody to get jumped in. I mean, it's pretty sick shit that's going on at the LA Sheriff's Department. Yeah, so that said, let's do a positive story. So there was an interesting article on Politico today, and Americans united on a slew of issues despite contentious election season. As the U.S. heads into the final 50-day sprint of a 2020 campaign in which political polarization has hit a fever pitch, new polling out on Tuesday reveals numerous points of bipartisan consensus among the American public on the rights and values key to the country's national identity. I think that's really interesting because you would think if you asked anybody, they would say that we are divided on these things. Though I have more thoughts on that in a few minutes. Moreover, the survey conducted for Harvard University's Carr Center for Human Rights and Institute of Politics and obtained by Politico ahead of its release found that more than 7 in 10 Americans believe they have more in common with other people than many think. I hate the ads. It also found that most Americans hold an expansive view of their rights beyond those explicitly laid out in the Constitution, but which they are under threat. Overall, I think Americans want not to be divided as politics are forcing it to be, and that's probably the biggest message of this poll, said John Shattuck, director of the Carr Center's project on reimagining rights and responsibilities in the United States and a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Division is not what most Americans are seeking, he added. The findings, including that 8 in 10 Americans agree that without our freedoms, America is nothing, could be telling in an election that features President Donald Trump and Joe Biden, the Democratic presidential nominee, battling each other to claim the mantle of uniter-in-chief while the country faces coinciding crises of public health and economic and racial justice. Several of the rights and freedoms that an overwhelming bipartisan majority viewed as essential to being an American, however, go far beyond those provided directly by the Constitution, like freedom of speech and religion. The right to clean air and water, for example, was considered important by 93% of those surveyed. Protection of personal data by 93%. The right to a quality education by 92%. Racial equity by 92%. Affordable health care by 89%, and the right to a job by 85%. Of 16 rights and values polled, a majority considered every single other either very or somewhat important to being American today. So, what I really wanted to talk about here is this paragraph. The right to clean air and water, 93%. 93% valued the right to clean air and water. Well, that's 93% of the country that needs to be made to understand about climate change. Protection of personal data by 93%. That's 93% of the country that has to learn about Edward Snowden and the NSA and the domestic spying that the US government is doing on Americans. The right to a quality education by 92%. That's a 92% that needs to understand that a quality education means an education through a bachelor's degree for those who would seek it, and through trade schooling and 2-year degrees for those who would seek those. The right to racial equity, 92%. That's a group of people that needs to understand systemic racism and needs to be talked into the fight to end systemic racism. Affordable health care by 89%. That's Medicare for all. And the right to a job by 85%. That's a federal jobs guarantee. What I'm saying is that when you look at these issues that people describe as fundamental rights, you see that all of the things that we're fighting for with the progressive agenda, all of those things are the things that all Americans agree America should provide. America should provide everyone health care. America should provide everyone an education. America should provide everyone racial equality and racial justice. And I think that's what most Americans think. The toxicity is in all of the propaganda, and the lies. And what I mean by that is the century of anti-socialist propaganda and anti-union propaganda that single-handedly tore apart what Franklin Delano Roosevelt built. Anyway, we can overcome those things, and we can definitely make a difference on that. So anyway, I found that fascinating. Now moving on, I'm going to show you too much of the NBC Nightly News from last night, but I'm doing it because I was blown away. I sometimes watch the nightly news shows on YouTube, of course, because I'm unplugged, but I sometimes watch the nightly news shows just to get some of the visuals, because the one thing they do good is put on a show. So if I want to see the fires, I'll get to see some of the visuals of the fires, and I'm always curious to see how they're reporting the news on these network news shows. So I took a look at the NBC Nightly News broadcast from last night, and I hope you can hear the audio when I show this, because last night the audio did not work out so well. Anyway, here we go. I'm going to let Lester Holt start us off here. I want you to listen to the phrases they use here without using two particular words. Check this out.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, a split screen of nature's fury.
Split screen of nature's fury.
Country, entire communities incinerated by wildfires.
Entire communities incinerated.
The air barely breathable.
The air barely breathable.
Casualties we discovered in the ash and
mass
rubble.
Casualties.
While the South braces for Hurricane Sally, intensifying as it bears down on the Gulf Coast tonight.
It all sounds pretty
Residents
intense, Lester.
Scrambling to prepare and get out before it hits tomorrow. We have it all covered for
I
you.
wonder what caused it all.
Chesky in the
I wonder what caused it all, Lester. What's going on? Where did that come from? Where did the split screen of nature's fury come from? Why were entire communities incinerated? I shouldn't be laughing because this is not funny, but I think it's so absurd the way they cover the fires on these fucking shows. It's completely ridiculous because they're not talking about the elephant in the room, which is climate change, which is the fact that if we don't get our shit together, we are in big, big trouble. So let's see who is able to bring this broadcast back after Lester Holt tanks
storm zone.
Tonight, Hurricane Sally packing an early punch. The slow-moving storm already flooding parts of the Gulf Coast ahead of landfall as neighborhoods brace for torrential rain and a potentially deadly storm surge.
So I'm watching this and I'm thinking, another big hurricane, they've got to talk about climate change.
Some people just can't leave financially or physically. Those are the ones that I worry about.
Mandatory evacuations now stretch from Alabama to Louisiana.
We pray that Sally doesn't do any harm, but we must be prepared just in case.
Hundreds of thousands now doing whatever they can to get ready.
One of those things you don't know until she takes land.
Sally, one of
four
tropical
cyclonic storms
through the Atlantic,
in the Atlantic.
A rare sight.
Look at that. 4: Hurricane Sally, Hurricane Paulette, Tropical Storm Teddy, and Tropical Storm Vicky all coming right our way. And why is that? Why is that happening? Morgan Chesky, are you going to tell us why that's happening?
In New Orleans, crews shut floodgates early. The city no longer expecting a direct hit, but still facing disastrous flooding. A painful deja vu for Willie Banks, who evacuated for Hurricane Laura just over 2 weeks ago. Now he's living in a hotel, his home still without power or clean water.
Do you feel stuck right now?
We are stuck. I feel stuck. We are stuck.
because of the situation. And there's nothing we can do, and it's out of our hands.
And tonight here in Biloxi, Mississippi, where Sally could make landfall, the rain's already beginning to start. If forecasts ring true, it might not be measured in inches, but feet. Lester?
All right.
Well, there we have it. Morgan Chesky tanks. I don't know what he thinks he's doing. He thinks this is a newscast because the news is climate change, brother. The news is climate change. This is part of the problem. This is a big part of the problem. A big part of the problem in that corporate news doesn't want to talk about climate change because their corporate interests are aligned with the corporate interests of the fossil fuel companies. That's why. So let's see. That's 2 newsmen down. Who's coming up next?
Right, Morgan,
Third up to
thanks
bat.
very much. Let's get right to
Any
Al
chance of
Roker
talking
now
about
with the
climate
latest
change?
tracking on
It's
this
Al
hurricane. Al, what
Roker.
are we looking at?
Lester, Sally's now gone through rapid intensification, a Category 2 storm with 100-mile-per-hour winds moving west-northwest at 6 miles per hour, making landfall as a Category 2 sometime late Tuesday,
Come on, Lester.
early Wednesday morning, and then
Al
continuing on
Roker.
into the
Come on.
southeast. We are looking at impacts.
You got to
that are
mention
going
climate
bring in
change,
with it
buddy.
Very
You're a
heavy
weatherman.
storm surge. Some
You're
places
supposed to pay
7
attention to the
11
climate.
feet along
You're
the
supposed to
Gulf
care
Coast.
about it.
Rainfall
You're a
upwards of 10
weatherman.
feet in some spots. Flash flooding, moderate
Is there
river
climate change
flooding
or not,
as
Al
well.
Roker? I don't know
Heavy
what to
winds
think.
anywhere from 50 to 85
It's
miles per
ridiculous.
hour, Lester, with the threat of tornadoes. We'll continue to track it all night long. Lester?
And they say Al Roker is a weatherman's weatherman. You know? I mean, what a disappointment. What a disappointment. We're 4 minutes into these stories about wildfires and hurricanes, and they haven't mentioned climate change. This is willful ignorance. This is not an accident. So Al Roker was a bust. That's 3 up and 3 down.
All right,
Let's see
Al,
what we get
thanks.
next.
In the west tonight, deadly wildfires still raging across the region after
Miguel
destroying thousands
Almaguer.
of homes and forcing tens
You
of
are up.
thousands to evacuate. And now the slow but desperate search for the missing. Miguel Almaguer is in Oregon.
Now we're back to the fires on the West Coast. Certainly they're going to mention climate change here.
It took minutes for wildfires in Oregon to incinerate 6 towns.
Phyllis, your house is gone. Oh.
Today in this hellscape, the grim search for bodies is underway.
The apocalyptic
It
hellscape.
feels like Armageddon.
With
Armageddon.
the death toll rising and dozens
There's so many ways to say
for,
climate change
state
without
officials
saying
call
climate
the
change.
smoldering apocalyptic scenes a mass
Apocalyptic.
fatality incident.
Mass fatality incident. What is causing this mass fatality incident, Miguel Almaguer? What's causing
Officials
it?
here see
Please tell
parallels
us.
to the 2018 fire in Paradise, California.
To hear about what happened.
What
in
caused that
Paradise,
fire?
it was on everybody's
Why are
mind.
fires more frequent, Miguel
During that
Almaguer?
inferno that destroyed the town, 85 were killed.
The biggest casualty we've had here again is the loss of life.
Again, I don't
We
mean
never
to
would have
mock
predicted that.
the loss of
As
life
the
and stuff that they're
wildfires
covering
explode out of
in this
control
story,
in
which is
Oregon,
incredibly
a record
important.
1 million acres torched in just 1 week.
But I do mean to mock
double
these
the state's
journalists
average loss
who are not
for
doing
an
their
entire
jobs.
year. Across the West, in a season where firefighters have been overrun by flames, at least 35 are dead. Thousands of homes are gone, and tens of thousands remain evacuated. Today, the president briefed on the fear red flag warnings could fuel another
Well, they're talking
overnight
about Trump. They
disaster,
must talk about
including
climate
this
change
fire
now,
outside
right?
Los Angeles. Meantime, hundreds of miles away from the burn zone, no escape from nature's fury.
I can't breathe. Kind of makes my brain a little foggy.
I know how you
The
feel.
largest cities
That's what
in
it's
the
like here in
West
LA.
choking on the world's most polluted air. Doctors warn the toxic smoke can trigger respiratory problems, strokes, even heart attacks.
We started to wear the N95s rather than just the cloth mask because of the ash.
It's got my allergies flaring.
An environmental catastrophe compounded by a natural disaster.
An environmental catastrophe compounded by a natural disaster. Oh my God, it's like climate change bingo. All the different ways you can say climate change without saying climate change. An environmental catastrophe compounded by a natural disaster. What does that mean? What exactly does that mean? An environmental catastrophe compounded by a natural disaster. Well, which one is which? I don't know what he's talking about. They don't just come out and say climate change is real. We need to fucking deal with it.
as officials investigate possible acts of arson.
Arson.
Despite the terrible
It's
air quality,
arson
the search
that
for
did
the
this,
missing will
not climate
continue.
change.
In
Notice
these conditions,
we
that
are,
could take
what,
months.
4 reporters in
Lester?
All
and
right,
no
Miguel
mention of
Almaguer.
climate change. 4 journalists in and no mention of climate change. I know this is probably getting boring and repetitive by now, but here we go with Hallie Jackson to take us
Here
home.
tonight, thanks. And also in California this evening, President
Again,
Trump
this is
meeting with some of
yesterday's
those
news.
involved in the fight against those wildfires, while clashing with Joe Biden over whether climate change is a major
Climate. I
factor.
see the word
That
climate.
story, here's
Okay,
Hallie
we're talking
Jackson.
about climate change,
On the
finally.
campaign trail, climate change dominating tonight, with the president landing in a smoky California haze.
Okay, climate
for a
change is
briefing on the
dominating because it's
historic
real, right?
wildfires torching the West Coast. On the East Coast, a split-screen moment. Joe Biden in Delaware blasting the president's stance on climate crises, like bigger, more ferocious fires.
Okay, so Joe Biden's right about that,
4 more
right?
years in the White House. Why would anyone be surprised if we have more America ablaze? If he gets a second term, these hellish events will continue to become more common, more devastating, and more deadly.
Thank
Over
you,
the
Uncle
last
Joe.
4 years, President Trump has rolled back Obama-era environmental regulations, arguing that's better for jobs, pulled the U.S.
However,
out of the Paris climate deal, and
Trump
mocked
just
the
has a different
urgency
way
of
of
the
doing
threat.
things.
You only have 11 years to live, folks. 11 years, because climate change is just coming up on us so fast.
Today, the president focusing more on forest management.
When you have years of leaves,
He's focusing
dried
more
leaves
on
the
forest
ground,
management.
it just
He's
sets
not
it up as
wrong.
really a fuel for a fire.
He's
But
not
experts
lying.
say that's not enough.
If we ignore that science and sort of put our head in the sand and think it's all about vegetation
Listen to
management,
this.
we're not going to succeed together protecting Californians.
Okay, it'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
I wish science agreed with you.
Hey, well, I don't think science knows, actually.
The president's Western swing,
don't think
including
science
a rally in
knows, he
Nevada
says.
Sunday night, making headlines more for the setting than the speech. Indoors, no social distancing, few masks, despite the state.
So I think you're probably getting the point here, which is when they finally start talking about climate change, what do? They draw false equivalences. You know, they say, well, Trump is talking about this, Biden's talking about the other thing. At no point do they mention that the facts support the point Joe Biden is making. At no point do they mention the fact that the data suggests that Biden is right and there is such a thing as climate change, and climate change is fueling our fires and hurricanes and our droughts and our inland hurricanes and the acidification of the ocean and everything else. How are the American people supposed to understand climate change when the would-be arbiters of truth don't tell them the truth, don't tell them that they're being lied to, don't tell them that Donald Trump is just completely full of shit, you know? And this is not the only clip that I could share with you. I could share several clips. There was a great clip from local KTLA here in LA that didn't mention climate change. But here we go. Let's check this out. This is from the University of California. Media creates false balance on climate science, study shows. The American media lends too much weight to people who dismiss climate change, giving them legitimacy they haven't earned, posing serious danger to efforts aimed at raising public awareness and motivating rapid action, a new study shows. While it is not uncommon for media outlets to interview climate change scientists and climate change deniers in the same interviews, the effort to offer a 360-degree view is creating a false balance between trained climate scientists and those who lack scientific training, such as politicians. It's not just false balance. The numbers show that the media are balancing experts who represent the overwhelming majority of reputable scientists with the views of a relative handful of non-experts, UC Merced Professor Leroy Westerling said. Most of the contrarians are not scientists, and the ones who have very thin credentials. They are not in the same league with the top scientists. They aren't even in the league of the average career climate scientists. Westerling is one of 3 researchers from UC Merced who tracked the digital footprints of climate scientists and deniers across about 200,000 research publications and 100,000 digital and print media articles on climate change over the past few years. Their work is published in Nature Communications. Data shows that about half the mainstream media visibility goes to climate change deniers, many of whom are not climate scientists. This proportion increases significantly when blogs and other new media outlets are included, pointing to the rising role of customized media in spreading disinformation. So this is just a study. This article is actually from last year, to be fair, but this study shows exactly what you can observe just by watching any network news shows about the fires, about the hurricanes. They don't mention climate change. They simply leave it out. And they're doing everyone a grave disservice when they do that. I have two last things to talk about. I'm sure you've heard about this story, but after last night, I mean, if you were here last night, since I've deleted it off of my YouTube channel, because I don't want anyone to see what a miserable train wreck it was. But we were talking about the judge who was forcing people to go on birth control that we were talking about last night, and agree not to have children and all of this nonsense. Well, this is along the same lines, but far worse. Far worse. This is from Vice. Staggering number of hysterectomies happening at ICE facility, whistleblower says. We've questioned among ourselves, like, goodness, he's taking everybody's stuff out, said a former nurse at the facility. A whistleblower complaint filed Friday by several legal advocacy groups accuses a detention center of performing a staggering number of hysterectomies on immigrant women, as well as failing to follow procedures meant to keep both detainees and employees safe from the coronavirus. The complaint, filed on behalf of several detained immigrants and a nurse named Dawn Wooten, details several accounts of recent jarring medical neglect at the Irwin County Detention Center in Ocilla, Georgia, which is run by the private prison company LaSalle South Corrections and houses people incarcerated by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. In interviews with Project South, a Georgia nonprofit, multiple women said that hysterectomies were stunningly frequent among immigrants detained at the facility. When I met all these women who had surgeries, I thought this was like an experimental concentration camp, said one woman, who said she'd met 5 women who'd had hysterectomies after being detained between October and December 2019. The woman said that immigrants at Irwin are often sent to see one particular gynecologist outside of the facility. It was like they're experimenting with their bodies. In one case, Wooten said, a woman ended up with a hysterectomy, was not properly anesthetized, and overheard the doctor say that he'd taken out the wrong ovary. That woman had to go back and get her other ovary removed as well, Wooten said. We've questioned among ourselves, like, goodness, he's taking everybody's stuff out, said Wooten, who was a full-time employee at Irwin until July. That's his specialty. He's the uterus collector. I know, that's ugly. So I don't see the numbers in this article. They were in another article, the Law and Crime article. But this happened to a lot of women. This happened to a lot of women. And this is really a human rights violation. It's eugenics to force people to have hysterectomies, to force people who are in a bad power situation because you don't want them to reproduce. That's all this is, plain and simple. There is no other reason to be forcing hysterectomies on women that are being held in these concentration camps. Ben Dixon on his podcast today covered this and went through a bit of the long history of efforts at eugenics that have been the hallmark of white supremacy from the first days. And he mentioned 32 states in the United States of America, 32 states have had forced sterilization at some point in their history in the 20th century. And, again, this is violence against black bodies. This is violence against people of color. It's reprehensible, and anyone who thinks ICE should exist, I'm case in point. Once an organization has committed this many crimes against humanity, separating children from their families, sexually assaulting children, and now forced hysterectomies, this is barbaric behavior, absolutely barbaric. We didn't have ICE before 2003, I think. We didn't need ICE. We don't need ICE. It's just extra policing. It's just extra policing and extra punishment for people who weren't lucky enough to be born white. And it's just, oh God. Anyway, one last thing that I want to do today. This Twitter thread from the Movement for Black Lives. This is from today. 57 years ago in Birmingham, Alabama, as churchgoers worshiped with family and friends, 4 white supremacist men planted and set off dynamite sticks. The terrorists killed 4 little girls who were near the site of the explosion: Addie Mae Collins, Carol Denise McNair, Carol Rosenon Robertson, and Cynthia Dion Wesley. A 5th child, Sarah Rudolph, survived but was blinded in one eye and had 21 pieces of glass in her face overall. Today we remember the girls who lost their lives. Sarah, whose life has been forever impacted, and the others who were injured on Sunday, September 15th, 1963. We must never forget about the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. So I saw that and I thought that is very much worth a mention. So thank you guys for tuning in to the Daily Faded tonight. I hope the show is a little bit better than last night. Not quite the train wreck. And I will be back tomorrow night. Peace out. Make sure you hit like and subscribe and notifications and all that good stuff. I'll see you tomorrow night at 8 o'clock.